Welcome to the Ezekiel TechCast, where we bring you all things science, engineering, technology, and innovation. I'm your host, Ezekiel Iferia, and today we are joined by Adam Sand, CEO of Roofing Business Partner and co-founder of Foundation Project. He's spent over a decade helping roofing companies professionalize their operations and stop leaving money on the table. Now he's doing something no one else is, rolling them up, layering in AI and autonomous technology and taking them public. If you are a roofing owner ready for a real exit or an investor looking at what the next roll-up opportunity is, this conversation is for you. So Adam, I am honored and excited to welcome you to the show. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us here today.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here. I did some background on you, and it sounds like you've done some interesting things. I like your project that you did with the C clamp, and you've had some interesting people on your show. So I was honored to be here, and I'm excited to still share a little bit about our journey and where we see technology going, and what has historically been a very boring, non-techie industry. It's not something that you would normally think of when you think of innovation in tech.
All right. It's great to have you here, Adam. So, you've spent over a decade working with hundreds of roofing companies. You've said most roofing owners build a job, not a company. So what do you mean by that? What's the difference between running a job and running a business?
Yeah. Roofing is one of those businesses where you can get in with no experience. Like there's no trade requirements. You don't have to go to school. So most people end up in roofing. They don't choose roofing. They either sold in another industry, and then when that industry took a bad turn, they end up selling in roofing because it's something that everybody needs. Everybody lives under a roof. Or they started out in the trade. They were on the roof doing the roofing, and they worked their way up to understanding the process of putting a roof on. And then they go start a company. But nowhere in there does anybody learn how to run and grow a business. And so what happens is they end up gradually taking on more and more responsibilities, and I call them fictitious savings. So they don't pay themselves a commission. They discount the roof because they don't have to pay commission. So then they end up taking on 4 jobs in the company, and their entire financial model is built around a self-employed entrepreneur which owns a job, and they never really build the business. And so in many cases, we have helped companies that do end up getting to, say, even $3 million in revenue, but then they are just completely wound up and they can't grow. And we show them how to go from a $3 million business to an $8 million business in a year. And that seems impossible to them, but that's just the distance between what you don't know, and becoming a person who knows what you didn't know, to the point where you now know what you know. And then eventually you don't know how much you know. You start to forget the things that you've learned because you just start to grow and elevate as a person and a business owner. And so I guess to answer your question more completely, a business owner understands how to create value, how to create opportunity, and how to align the personal, professional, and financial goals of the people in their organization to the needs of the business, so that the people take on elements in that division of labor to create a little mini economy. And that is what a business is. It's a little mini economy.
Okay, really insightful. So, what's one thing, that actually destroys a roofing company's value before an exit? What do owners do wrong that they don't even realize?
That list is quite extensive, but it's hard to pinpoint one thing. But if I had to put them in one category, it would be that they have not transferred the responsibilities of the owner to the leaders in the business. Because when you're buying a business, and I had to learn all this myself. I didn't know, I wasn't born this way. I had to learn this through going through my own journey. And a business's value is essentially a discount on the future earnings of a business. So, to make it into something everybody would understand, if you sell cigarettes, right, which is just cheap and sticky, right, it's addicting, and it's got a very proven, repeatable cycle. You got placement on shelves inside of stores. So if you're selling cigarettes, right? There is a realistic predictability that people will continue to buy cigarettes, and so therefore you would say, okay, well, if this business does $1 million in profit, if we do nothing, it's going to continue to make $1 million in net profit every year for the next 30 years, right? Because, like, let's say the next generation doesn't like smoking, right? So at least for this generation who's addicted to cigarettes, they're going to continue buying cigarettes for 30 years. So we would buy this business for 10 years of its net profit. So we would pay $10 million for a business that's going to make $1 million profit for 30 years because we're buying it for a discount on what realistically it would make. So the level of certainty that you can communicate in your offering that this business will continue to do what it is doing forever or for a long period of time, a buyer is going to offer you to purchase your business for a set number of years of net profit based on the realistic predictability that that net profit will continue to happen for an extended period of time. If they think 10 years, they'll give you 3. If they think 20 years, maybe they give you 7. If they think 30 years, maybe they give you 10. And so one of the most necessary components to selling a roofing company is that it's a people and service based business. You are selling people doing things as a service to others. So the people in your business have to completely operate without you, the owner, because the only thing that happens when you buy a business is a change of the owner's shares. So the owner cannot be a necessary component in the business.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, Adam, I'd like you to walk us through the foundation project. You are the co-founder of the foundation project. So, walk us through it in plain English. What are you actually building?
Yeah. So I've spent the last 10 years growing roofing companies, and most of that is kind of centered around providing the tools and the training and the frameworks to make a roofing company successful. So it's like a 3-legged stool. If you have the tool, right, but you don't have if you have the tool, that's great, but you need the framework in which that tool is meant to be used. So, like, plain speak, if you have a hammer but you don't have anybody to hold it and you don't know how to swing it, it doesn't matter how good the hammer is. Now, if you have a hammer, right, and you have an operating manual for how to use the hammer, that's great. But then you need to train people to use the hammer in accordance with the operating manual of the hammer. Any one of those legs falls off the stool tips over. So our business has really been around saying, okay, we will be the complete solution. We have the tools, we have the operating frameworks, and we can provide the training and the change management, right, to get your team to use the operating frameworks on the provided tools that are good. So in doing that, we didn't own the tools, right? We're building on HubSpot, we're building on Zuper, right? We're building on Company Cam, we're building on Just Call. These are all software companies that we don't own. And our roofers that we do this for, they don't own that software either. And we're building roofing companies that we don't own, right? We get these companies to go from 3 million to 8 million or from 6 million to 60 million in 6 years. We don't own the software. We don't own the roofing company. And that's fine, right? Like we have greatly appreciated the partnerships that we've had with software, and we appreciate the partnerships we've had with roofers. But I realized that I could have a larger impact because some percentage of my customers don't listen. Some percentage of the tools that I work with end up selling or getting acquired by another software company, and then we're left scrambling. And so I really thought, how could we have the biggest impact? And I also see in roofing, there's this big consolidation effort. So private equity is buying up a lot of roofing companies. So they'll buy 10 companies for 3 years of their profit, smush them together, and then sell them for 10 years of their profit. It's a short-term game, but when an industry gets too fragmented, meaning there's too many roofing companies, that attracts finance and capital to consolidate an industry. And eventually, the industries go from having tens of thousands to hundreds of operators. Look at in the United States, you at one point in time had 2,500 car manufacturers. Now you have 3, 4, 6, depending on how you count them, right? And so you don't have that many automakers. You used to have thousands of heavy equipment rental companies. Now you have basically two big ones. You used to have thousands of independent mail carriers. Now you have the United States Postal Service, FedEx, UPS, right? And a handful of like package delivery companies. So this happens to every industry eventually if it gets too fragmented. Now, what eventually happens is there's a public company that enters the space. And I thought that there should be an opportunity for roofers to be a part of that publicly traded roofing entity rather than just being the final destination for a bunch of private equity firms. Roofers should have a chance to be a part of it. The other problem that I see is that all of the software that roofing companies run on, in their terms of service, they sell your data to insurance companies, which are kind of like the enemy of a roofing company. Like it's like the adversary of a roofer. A homeowner gets hit by a storm, then the homeowner files an insurance claim. The roofer comes to quote the roof. The insurance company wants to pay as little as possible or not pay at all. And the roofer obviously wants them to pay as much as possible, but at least fix the roof. So that's your adversary in some cases. Or they sell the information to the manufacturers of shingles because there's only like 6 of them, or the suppliers of the shingles because there's only like 3 of them. Those have already been consolidated. So they buy the data. And what that kind of does is means that the suppliers, the manufacturers, and the insurance companies hold all the power because they have all the knowledge. They have all the aggregate with them. And these software companies, like a very recent one, a software called AccuLynx, sold to Verisk, an insurance company, for $2.34 billion. Now, selling for 17 times revenue, right? So not even profit, 17 times revenue, top line revenue, that you don't do that because you built a great software. You do that because you have great data, right? And that data is being purchased by an insurance company because it's worth it to the insurance company. It's kind of like your worst enemy buying your diary, but instead it's the diary of 100,000 roofers. So I thought that the roofers that are on our platform, since we're going public, we should build our own platform similar to how Delta Airlines doesn't use Salesforce. They have their own ticket management system. They have their own website. They have their own mobile app. And the real long-term picture, right? What makes this investable? Because to get all this done sounds great and altruistic. And yeah, roofers should get to own the value of their data, and roofers should be able to be a part of the incitement or the creation of the publicly traded roofing company. That's all great. But you got to get investors to pay for it. And investors buy a growth story, not a margin story. They want to see growth. And the biggest single expense of a roofing company is the labor to install the roof. And if you look out far enough, like if you think in terms of decades, not days, we know that robots are coming, right? Robots are coming to do work. We know this is coming. The way we saw AI and how it disrupted knowledge work, marketing, creative work, all this kind of stuff. Well, robotics is going to do the same thing. And we believe that in 10 years or less, I believe it to be 3 to 5 years, there will be robots working on roofs. They are already working in factories. They're already cleaning houses, right? Cars are like autonomous cars are just robots with tires. They're already in our daily life. And so investors are interested in the idea of robotics and roofing because what you're seeing is there's 2 kind of big finance worlds. You have private equity and venture capital. Okay. Private equity buys frothy, fragmented markets, combines businesses, and finds profit, right? They make economies of scale. If 30 roofing companies all have to market their roofing company, they're all paying $5,000 a month to a Facebook ad company to market their roofing company. But if you take those 30 roofing companies and combine them, you can get 3 very talented marketers to run the ads for all of them, right? You find savings, margin, profit. Venture capital is different. Venture capital is venture. They're doing a new venture. They're going into venturing into a new world. They're the present biting into the future. And venture capital says, okay, to make this future a reality, somebody has to invest in it before it's real. And they'll place 10 bets, and 9 of those bets fail, but 1 succeeds and pays for the rest, right?
Mhm.
So you invest in 10 companies, one of them's Facebook, and 9 of them you've never heard of. Facebook pays for the 9 losses, whereas private equity doesn't have 9 losses for every 1 win. They generally have 8 wins for 2 losses. But here's what's interesting about today. Venture capital can make things faster than ever. Software they can make faster than ever. Technology they can make faster than ever. But the hardest thing about speed, right, is the resistance to change, right? People resist change. They get uncomfortable with change. And so in the hospital industry, for example, there's amazing medical technologies, things that can make kidney stones go from a full day surgery in an operating room to something that can happen in a day office, something that turns it from a $50,000 cost to an $1,800 cost. The hardest part about getting that into the market is actually the hospitals and the medical centers not wanting to venture into it. They just don't want to do it. They're like, nah, like we don't know, we're not sure. And so venture capital's number one problem is that the hospitals won't buy it. Now, venture capital or private equity would typically go buy a bunch of hospitals and find profit, right? They would consolidate the health insurance programs they work on. They get bigger discounts because they buy more stuff, right, in bulk. So venture capital and private equity are merging, and the venture capital company is buying the hospitals like a private equity firm would. And private equity is investing in venture technology. And so investors, they might go one direction or the other typically, but they're now starting to think the same. They're starting to think like a merge of the two. And so you would say, oh, we're going to make robots that can roof. That's a venture investment. But the hardest part about getting robots on the roof would be getting the roofers to train them and use them. So what do? You buy the roofing companies so you can force the training and force the deployment. And so through buying and rolling up these roofing companies, deploying artificial intelligence and software that they own and giving them a piece of that public entity, they have a vested interest in deploying and training the robots because they own the outcome. They have a piece of what those shares will be worth in the future. And so then the venture investor is buying the roofing companies to force the resistance of change out of the way. I hope that is clear enough.
Yes, yes, Adam, that was a really deep and elaborate response. And I have a couple of follow-up questions for that. How is an AI native roll-up, different from the classic private equity, buy, cut cost, flip playbook?
Yeah. I've actually tried selling our technology to private equity companies. Like I have
Mm-hmm.
built and done work for many private equity backed roofing businesses. They don't want to invest in it because it doesn't match their fund cycle, right? It'll take 10 years to pay off. They want to get in, get out in 5. So it just doesn't match their fund cycle. Now, the difference in how an AI native company runs and why it doesn't really line up with private equity is because in a truly AI native company, you centralize intelligence and you democratize the travel of information. So, what does that mean? Well, when you're in founder mode in a company, right? You are working with 5 dudes or 5 friends or a small team, and you're all doing everything. And the founder can speak to everyone directly, right? And then it's a very flat organization, right? It's just a flat line, right? And then just like the Roman legions, right? Companies have run the same way that Roman legions did in like 500 AD, right? Which is where you get hierarchy. You get a triangle, right? So you get corporals, sergeants, master sergeants, lieutenants, and you go all the way up to captains and everything like that. And so and then in companies, you have You have coordinators, right? Well, you have individual contributors, coordinators, managers, directors, junior vice president, senior vice president, C-level, right? And basically, that was all about communicating information up and down that chain. So managers communicate to a director. The directors communicate to a vice president. The vice presidents communicate to a CEO or a CFO or a COO. And it's because you needed a way to translate information up and down this hierarchy. Well, an AI native company is more like a circle, right? And so then information is stored in a centralized place. You call it a RAG database or a knowledge base or a second brain or a singularity organization. There's all kinds of names for it. All it means is all the information, everything everybody does goes to a centralized place. Easy way to understand it is if you think about Tesla's cars, right? Every single one of those cars is a sensor, right? And every car gets better because all that information goes to a centralized place, it gets computed, and then a better way to do full self-driving pushes out to all the cars at the same time. So every car gets better because everybody in the organization, in this case, cars, every car in the organization is a node connected to the center. And so private equity doesn't like that because there's the private equity firm and then there's all the companies they own. And there's this, and basically the companies report to the private equity. It's broken in that function. And so an AI native roofing company means that everything in the business has to become a sensor. That's how every autonomous thing ever happens. Because if you look at, say, Bedrock, which is automating and building autonomous construction equipment, so those big, diggers and front end loaders and backhoes and cats and dozers and all that, the first thing is always sensors, right? Because they put sensors on equipment that humans use, and then they learn how the humans use it, and then they eventually don't need the driver. Look at Palantir and Anduril, the military equipment companies. They put sensors on the soldiers in the field. They understand how the field works, how the battlefield actually runs, and then they learn how to make better weapons. So an AI native organization at its simplest form just means that everything in the business needs a sensor of some kind, a way to report back to a central system that can compute all of that data to make better data-driven decisions. And then everybody communicates with and derives action and decisions from a centralized place. So it removes the hierarchy.
Okay. All right. So, you say that robots are coming and you believe in about 3 to 5 years, there will be robots working on roof. And, one of the challenges you mentioned, you said the hardest thing to get robots to the roof is getting the roofers to train them. So let's look at things from the perspective of the roofers. Why do you think that's a challenge for them? Do you think they fear robots will one day replace their job? So I'd like to hear your own opinion on this.
Yeah, it feels like you're standing on a branch, cutting the branch, and then eventually you fall with the branch, right?
Yeah.
So right now, what they do is they take advantage of disadvantaged economies, right? So they go to third world countries and they put cameras on people's heads as they're cleaning or organizing or running a distribution center, and they train on this data. And because those people are disadvantaged, right, then they basically don't get any stake in it. They're basically told, do it or you just don't work here and you're going to have to go find a job somewhere else. And guess what? They're doing it too. I don't like that. That's not very human centric. So then some companies, what they do is they pay you to do it. So right now in America, you can take your phone and strap it to your head and it goes like this. And then you get paid $20 an hour to do housework. And as long as it can see your hands in the camera, you get paid for that hour. So if it caught 40 minutes, then you get 2/3 of an hour's pay because it could only see your hand for 40 minutes of that hour. And then the third way of doing it is where you give people equity in the training. So you say, okay, well, we're not going to pay you hourly. We're not going to force you to do it because you're not going to do it. You're going to smash the equipment. You're going to tell us you don't like it, right? And we're not going to pay you hourly to do it because you're going to define whether you think that's worth it or not, because it's going to take your job. So the third way to do it is to make it so that everybody who contributes to the training set owns a piece, a share, a stake in that. And so that's one piece of it, is that people have to have stakes. They have to see that this benefits them, which is not a new concept. Companies used to give away pensions all the time. If you work at this company for 40 years, you get a pension. If you're in the military, you get a pension. If you work for the government, you get a pension. Why do you believe it when you get a pension from the military or the government? Because you believe that the military or the government will be around for 100 years and they'll pay, right? But people don't believe it with companies because they're not so sure they'll be around. So you have to make people believe in that. You have to create smart, intelligent belief systems and have a vision that people believe in. The other part of it is that you have to show people that you're doing it in a human-centric way, because it's not like the robot's going to take your job. It's that all of a sudden, it used to be that to dig a hole in the ground, you needed 30 people to dig the hole. Now you need 2 people. You need one guy to spot the hole and the other guy to be in the machine digging the hole. So what have we become? Heavy equipment operators. Heavy equipment operators make more money than 30 dudes with a shovel. So you're moving roofers from being manual laborers that are doing a grunt work job that nobody wants to do, that's unsafe, that drains you of energy, that takes time and energy away from what you could invest into your family and being there for your sons and daughters and coming home with energy. Like, roofers go home bagged, tired, exhausted, hurt. Well, if you go to work and you're operating and assisting a robot crew that's doing 90% of the hard work, and you just get to do the craftsman work, the stuff that the robot can't do in the tight spaces, the detail work, right? If you're setting up the robot crew, if you're tearing down the robot crew, if you're packaging up the robot crew, if you're hooking up the robot crew for the safety equipment, that stuff is where now all of a sudden you have 30 guys on 5 crews, right? Or 6 crews. Well, now you can have 30 guys which operate on 15 crews. And now the roofing company is more successful. The roofer is paid more money, and they're also going home with a feeling like their job is respected, and that then they go home with energy so they can play with their son, they can play with their daughter, they can enjoy time with their wife. So you're not just giving them stakes in the future, but you're also creating a better future.
Absolutely. That was very insightful. So you talk about putting robots on roof. So what's actually real? What's feasible in the next 3 to 5 years, versus what should we see as purely sci-fi? And also last, what should the roofing owner or roofer do about it right now?
Yeah. So you want to look at what is happening at a scale bigger than you. So everybody kind of heard about Elon Musk as a trillionaire because of all these big mergers where he rolled his companies up, right? And he's not a trillionaire yet. He has the ability to purchase shares. He has options that will be distributed to him if he accomplishes certain things. One of those things that he has to accomplish is putting 1 million robots into the market. So 1 million people or 1 million companies have to buy 1 million robots, and that unlocks some of his shares. So then he could then sell them and have the money. So he's not the only guy doing it. China is further ahead by volume. And there's like Boston Dynamics and DJI and Figure and so many more. So you have to look and say, okay, the world is creating robots, and most of them are creating humanoid robots. The world is mostly built around humans, right? There's a reason why a train is the size of a train. It's because it's about the same width as a horse and buggy was. And then if you look at a car, it's same units of measurement. Like, why don't we sit 3 wide in a car or 4 wide in a car? It makes sense because it's the same size that the train was, the same size the horse and buggy was. It's roughly the same size. So the world, the door handles, the desks, the cupboards, everything in the world is built to work around humans. So the robots that do most of this are probably going to be platforms that you insert training material into. right? You take a computer or a phone and you put an app inside of it. So, you take a Super Nintendo or a PlayStation, you put a cartridge or a disc inside of it. You put the thing in it to turn it in. So as hardware and software become kind of ubiquitous and almost merging, these platforms will be where you put a training set into them, and so that's how you keep it from being sci-fi. You have a bunch of companies racing to make the best, most capable humanoid robots that can just function in a world that exists and was designed for people, where everything is like there's a handle, it's here, it's where your hand is. So largely you'll see humanoid robotics, and then you might see efficiencies made for things that might fit the job a little better. Like, does the robot's going to be on its knees most of the day when it's a roofer? So, do you split the roofing installation portion into a robot that just doesn't need a knee, right? Like, that will probably be a part of it. But then you asked to, so like, to determine the difference between sci-fi, you just have to think that a humanoid robot is like a PlayStation or a phone or a computer. Like, everybody has the same computer, but does vastly different things with it. So everybody can have a humanoid robot, but we'll do vastly different things with it. Some, just like people, you might have a bulkier one, a bigger one, and that's probably going to be the Tesla 5-C for construction. And then you're going to have a daintier one and a smaller one, a lighter one. And that might be the one that helps you pick out the right shirt at a clothing store or something, right? So there's going to be different models, but more or less similar platforms, just like you have a MacBook Pro and you have a MacBook Air, right? You're going to have a bigger
Mm-hmm.
one and a lighter one. Now, the second part of your question was, what should a roofing company owner do? Well, I understand the resistance to change. I understand if you don't like this future. I myself am very concerned about this future. I wrote a 30-page AI manifesto about how I feel about all this and where I think, and what I would just say to anybody is that this future is probably coming, whether we like it or not, because we have a 0 to a billion track record of putting technology back in a bottle. If technology makes life easier and increases the capacity of human beings to do more, it survives every single time. Cars were easier than horses. Phones were easier than sending mail on horse carriers, right? Emails
Mm.
were easier than sending letters. Video calls are better at consuming information than a book, right? So technology, we don't put technology back in the bottle very well as humans. And that's something that's really hard to wrestle with, because this level of revolution is very uncomfortable. Knowing that we're probably not going to stop it because of our own laziness, self-interest, right? And desire for convenience, then we have to say, how can I align myself best to the future? And the way that you can align yourself best to the future is to try and find an organization to align with that shares your same morals and values, that you believe is going to do things in a human centric way, if that's what you want. If you want to be an evil overlord and create a bunch of evil robots to take over the world, then I probably ain't your guy, right? But like, if you want to do this in a human centric way that has a distributed gain for everybody who contributes to it in a meritocracy style of deployment, then like maybe we're an organization to align with. If you want to sell your roofing company, take $5 million and move to a tiny little country and take people on fishing boat tours, like, then sell to private equity and like get out of here, right? And go to a place where it'll probably come last. You know what I mean? But if you're going to live in like the West, right? Or you're going to live in China, or you're going to live in like, certain places in the world where it'll just make economic sense to use robots and autonomy, you probably want to find a way to align yourself in the most probable way that you will be able to continue to support your team and your family, so that you can just be a part of the new world. Because if you look through history, the people who have resisted it, the people who have been like a bastion against progress, they
Mm-hmm.
typically go down for being fighters, but they're also forgotten. And if you look at a story like the Luddite fallacy, right? There's two perspectives on this. The Luddites were people who bashed up these machines because these machines made it easier to do the job and it was taking away their job. So they smashed up these machines thinking that all the jobs would go away, right? And in the end, they were wrong, but it did take a generation. Why did it take a generation? Because of resistance to change. But the people who supported the progress, they created generational wealth. They did something to change their family trees. And this has happened so many times throughout history, in that you look at Coca-Cola, right? They were taking a lot of bad press because what do? They suck the water out of rivers all over the world and make entire communities dry. And some people hate them for it. So what did they do? They found a technology, right? And this technology ran on bike parts. Like there's a piece of technology, but the rest of it ran on used bike parts. Like you could make this thing run on junk that you found anywhere. And you could put one end of this tube into water, in any kind of water, and the water that came out the other end was safe enough to be injected into your body. So it was this water cleaning machine, right? And they deployed these all across like these communities that had been displaced by Coca-Cola's water efforts, sucking rivers dry to make Coca-Cola for people in Boston. Well, the community, right? They found that these machines kept getting smashed up and broken. And who was doing it? And this is just history, right? It was the women. And because the women typically went to the river to get these jugs of water that they'd put on their shoulder and carry back to the community, right? Well, this was the one time during the day that they would be able to get away, to just go out and enjoy themselves. It was like women going to the mall, but they were going to get the water. And this machine made it so they didn't have to do it. So the women smashed up the machines. It was cleaner, better water that didn't require going and walking a mile. You didn't have to carry a clay pot on your head. And they still smashed these machines up. And Coca-Cola put like $500 million. See this over and over and over again throughout history, right? But the communities that rallied around, okay, we have a water source. We have a water source now that can take not clean water and turn it into clean water. If we can build a community around this water source instead of some river that is now dry, and rather than complaining about the fact that the river is dry now and protesting and fighting it, let's just move our community. And I get the cultural issues. I understand and have empathy for that. But the world needs to just get more efficient all the time. Unless you like Thanos snap half the world away, we have to find ways to coexist better, right? And so to coexist better, we have to become efficient. And then there will be gains in efficiency provided by technology. And if we rally around those things, generally we're left with a better world. It's not perfect, and it never will be. The only guy who was perfect, they hung him on a cross. So like the world won't ever appreciate perfection, even if it showed up on their doorstep.
Indeed. That was a really interesting response, and I love the storytelling, the scenarios you painted just to explain it. So thank you very much for that, Adam. To wrap things up here for our listeners who are roofing company owners, exploring what a better exit could look like, or investors interested in this opportunity. So where is the best place for them to start, to connect with you and learn more about the foundation project?
Yeah. So the bulk of the roofing community exists on Facebook. It's just the channel that they've chosen, right? Like marketers and software people, they're on LinkedIn, right? Nerds and politicians, they're on X. Roofers are on Facebook, and I go where my community is. So you look up Adam Sand on Facebook, that's probably the fastest place to get a reply from me. Or you can go to foundationproject.net and go through like a web form. But if you want to talk to me personally, that's the fastest way to get me.
All right. I'll be sure to have your account on Facebook linked in the show notes so that our listeners can really go connect with you. Indeed, it's been a truly valuable conversation with you here today on the show, and I thank you for taking the time to join us.
Yeah, of course. It was a pleasure. You're a great interviewer. It said, I hope that people out there get some perspective and have some interesting conversations. And I hope to connect with some people and meet some new people as a result of being here.